Good Yontif. Believe it or not, this is my 10th Rosh HaShanah here at Temple Emanu-El. And it feels like the time has flown by. Rather than the weightiness that I anticipated, these years have unfolded with a sense of lightness and joy. In my private life, 10 years have brought our children from toddlers to teenagers, close to moving out of the house and towards independence. Perhaps you too can relate to this type of intense emotion that's felt from knowing that this type of family time is limited, making it all the more precious. The impression that this past decade and our Temple Emanu-El community have left on me stands in stark contrast to my experience with the world at large. During COVID, when the world felt isolating, our Judaism brought us together. When the world seemed ready to tear itself apart, our Temple Emanu-El community remained warm and supportive. When the world seeks to tear us down, we insist on building up. As the world storms around us, we create a safe haven. This doesn't mean that COVID, ugly political campaigns, and October 7th didn't happen. Of course they did. They're part of the reality that we live in. But how we, as Jews and as a sacred community, have responded to the world around us is something that I am deeply proud of. As you know, last spring I took 4 months for a sabbatical. I hope to find nourishment in order to continue giving the best of myself to this community. My wish was to spend time, as much time as I could manage, with my wife and kids, my parents, and my siblings, while we're still all here together. Congregational rabbis work long, hard hours. I love what I do, but it's very hard on a rabbi's family. During my sabbatical, I cherished driving my kids to school and taking them to every sports practice, game, and tournament. For me, the best part wasn't the thrill of watching them play, but rather the uninterrupted time with them in the car. Sometimes we talk, or sing along to their music, or just drive in silence. Even in the moment, I knew that this type of time with them was limited. On occasion, I'd express this out loud and let them know that I really love being their dad. Without fail, teenagers that they are, they'd roll their eyes at me, say something funny, but then after a pause, they quietly acknowledged that they understood what I was naming and that they felt it too. One of my goals on sabbatical was to go on a medical mission as a volunteer. Over the years, I've met doctors who dedicate their vacation time traveling to remote corners of the world, providing assistance to those in desperate need. Their commitment to help total strangers facing illness and injury has been deeply inspiring. So this past May, I met up with a group of 8 doctors and 12 pre-med students in Guatemala City, where we loaded ourselves, along with tons of food and medical supplies, onto a bus for a 7-hour drive to a region called Colón. Since I'm not a doctor, I was assigned to be in charge of manual labor and to serve as chaplain for the group. My name tag read, "Hello, I'm Rabbi Spike, spiritual leader / janitor." I can lift heavy things. No habla español. I smiled a lot. In that region, a group of indigenous Guatemalans lacking other options settled near a municipal dump. They don't speak Spanish. Rather, they communicate in a language called Quechua. Living in extreme poverty, they make a living scavenging through other people's trash for items they can use or sell. The story goes that some time ago, a priest visited the dump with tins of soup and discovered many orphans wandering around with no one to care for them. He felt compelled to do something about it, so he started an orphanage. He then realized that these kids needed to go to school, so with tremendous effort, he created one for them. The school became so good that all the children who lived nearby, even those with parents, began to attend. The establishment of the medical clinic by the group from Regis University was a natural next step in caring for people who would otherwise been forsaken. Each morning I rolled up my sleeves to get the clinic ready for the day, setting up the pharmacy, dental chairs, internist rooms, physical therapy space, and eyeglass station. From early morning until late at night, our team cared for people who were suffering. Sometimes they faced ordinary issues that could easily be managed with the right knowledge and medicine. Other times they dealt with conditions not seen in America for decades. In the evening, I helped the group process these heart-wrenching experiences, lending them spiritual reassurance that their presence and their efforts were holy, even if they couldn't always provide the medical relief that was desperately needed. Many times a day, I was amazed at the acts of compassion and respect reciprocated by both the medical staff and the patients. Every person had a name and a story. They were each someone's father or mother, daughter or son. There was an intentional gentleness in the air, and oftentimes smiles when navigating translation issues. After each interaction, we often prayed together, doctors, patients, and their families, recognizing the sacred nature of the moment. All of us so vulnerable, so connected, so very human. Expressions of, "Why is this happening to me?" mingled with, "Please make things a little better." And finally, gratitude for people who care enough to take a chance to try. In Judaism, our rabbis view prayer as existing on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, there's a belief that when we pray with the right words and intention, God somehow hears our prayers, which can influence the outcome. "Please God, heal her," could lead to God hearing and responding to the plea. On the other side of the spectrum, we can almost remove God from the equation altogether. This view says that our prayers are meant to remind us of our priorities, both individually and as a community, and that we each have a role to play in making a difference. In other words, your Misha B'Rach prayer for someone else's healing serves as a reminder to you that you can help. In everyday terms, this might mean taking them to the doctor's appointment, spending time with them so that they're not alone, or sending food as a tangible expression that you care. Of course, there's a third option, which takes the spectrum and connects it into a circle. This view suggests that when we pray, God does hear and answers our prayer, but not as some independent force out of nowhere, but rather through the efforts of regular people who choose to act. Our support for one another is the way God answers prayer in this world. According to this theology, we can become God's hands. How and when each part of this revolving wheel of prayer is highlighted is beyond our understanding. But what matters is that these perspectives are not mutually exclusive. They can all exist at once. For me, as I witness the doctors and their students care for the most marginalized and powerless, it reinforced my belief that this is how God repairs the brokenness. The truth is that the human condition includes tremendous suffering. But it's also true that there are people who will show up and help, and in doing so, become instruments in fulfilling some prayers, at least some of the time. Today is Rosh HaShanah, a day our rabbis claim is a thin place in time, where the barrier between our prayers and God's receiving is translucent. The awe with which we approach these New Year prayers has been compared to the awe that we would feel if our toes were right at the end, right at the edge of the Grand Canyon. Imagine looking down and then out. We would feel a sense of majesty and possibility, but also danger. Our mortality would come into focus, even as we assured ourselves that our feet were on solid ground. In that moment, we would wake up and know that the stakes were incredibly high. Our liturgy has us praying to be written in the Sefer Chaim, the book of life. By definition, faith must contain an element of doubt. Will God hear us? And will that make a difference? Are we praying to remind ourselves that the next page in the Sefer Chaim is blank and that we are the ones who wield the pen? Or are we, in fact, our own best chance to be God's answer? This past year has been a hard year for prayer, maybe the hardest that I've been alive for. The October 7th pogrom saw 6,000 Hamas murderers invade Israeli homes with the intent to kill, capture, abuse, and maim. In their wake of absolute terror, 1,200 Israelis were murdered, while another 250 people, including 30 children, were dragged into the tunnels of Gaza to be used as pawns. Over the past year of war and the rise of anti-Semitism in America and around the world, we've experienced a range of emotions. Yet the one constant, never diminishing heartache has been for our captive hostages. We obsessively checked the news and posted repeatedly on social media. We wore our yellow ribbons and dog tags to remember that we have a role to play and to refuse to forget. And we prayed. So deeply we prayed, please God, you who free the captives, free these captives and return them to their families, their desperate and sleep-deprived families who refuse to give up on their return. The face most familiar to many of us was that of a young American Jew named Hirsch Goldberg Poland. With hundreds of other young people, Hirsch was at the Novo Music Festival on October 7th, celebrating life and dancing. As Hamas closed in, he managed to send his parents a final text message: "I love you." Early on, we learned that Hirsch had been dragged into Gaza, severely injured, but alive. Throughout this past year of brutal angst, Rachel and John Goldberg Poland, Hirsch's parents, were relentless in speaking out on the international stage for all of the hostages. His mother, Rachel, became our voice demanding that the world pay attention, that our hostages receive help, and that they must be released. Why is no one crying out for these people to be allowed access to the Red Cross? She implored at the United Nations. Why is no one demanding just proof of life? This is a global humanitarian catastrophe. While Rachel spoke passionately about her son, she never focused on him alone. She made it her mission to highlight the humanity of all the hostages, their diverse nationalities, religions, and ethnicities. Her pleas reverberated against our prayers, echoes calling and answering one another. We are here. We are here. We are here. It was Rachel Goldberg Poland who started the masking tape ritual. Each day, she'd write a number representing the days since October 7th on a simple piece of tape and then place it over her heart. Many of us adopted this ritual. Each day, we'd peel off a new piece of tape and, using a Sharpie, write a new number and then place it over our hearts. What does the number on the tape mean? Friends and strangers would ask us as we went about our day. This is the number of days our people have been held in Gaza by Hamas, we would reply. This tape is to help raise awareness and to help us remember. In late August, mere days before her son was executed by Hamas, Rachel's words were amplified through a giant megaphone into Gaza. Hirsch, it's Mama. It's day 328. We're all here, all the families of the remaining 107 hostages. Hirsch, we're working day and night, and we will never stop. I need you to know that I'm giving you now the blessing I give you every single morning when I pray for you. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May you feel God's presence within you always, and may you find peace. On August 31st, despite their relentless efforts and all of our prayers, the world received news that 6 Israeli hostages, including Hirsch, have been killed. Their bodies were recovered from a tunnel in Rafah. And Rachel, Hirsch's mother, she wept. According to the Zohar, the Shekhinah, the feminine aspect of God, which embodies divine compassion and comfort, sometimes appears to us in the form of the biblical matriarch Rachel. When our reality is torn from us, when we are beside ourselves with grief, Rachel's weeping, raw and primal, cries out from the depths of her Jewish soul. Rachel's sorrow on behalf of her people makes her God's emissary. In this way, Judaism tells us, God weeps with us. God bears witness to our grief, and God shares in our deepest sorrow. It's been lost on no one that Rachel Goldberg Polin has become, unwillingly and unintentionally, the contemporary expression of our matriarch Rachel. Her prayers represented ours. Her desperate hopes were ours. Her tears and her grief, they were ours as well. There's a midrash in Judaism about a miraculous goblet that God keeps in the heavens. Its purpose is to catch all of the tears that the Jewish people have cried since time began. Each one is lovingly gathered up by God. Together, they're an expression of our collective grief and an expression of our collective love. It is said that from the tears of this chalice, our hope will one day grow again. This past year has been the hardest year that I can remember. A mother's prayer for her son to be returned alive went unanswered. Just as we know that many prayers from both sides of the Gaza border and now the Lebanese border seem to fall on deaf ears. After laying her son to rest, Rachel Goldberg Polin's prayer changed. It shifted from return him to us alive to at least he's not suffering. At least he didn't die alone. He was with a group of bright, generous, beautiful souls. And our prayers have shifted as well. Against the backdrop of our suffering, they have had to. We don't know with certainty if God hears prayers, but we can ensure that we are hearing one another and that we give voice to our collective grief, our neshama's cry for the Jewish nation. May our prayers continue to rain upon the heavens to seek help, and may we become God's instruments for good. May we be inspired by courageous acts of compassion and become ones who can inspire. And may we be the spokes of the revolving wheel of prayer, becoming the answers for one another. Kenya Radson. May it be God's will. Good Yontif.